Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the founder of Black Hat, Jeff Moss.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 8th Black Hat Singapore, the 4th that we've had in Singapore recently. But some of you may not remember, we were first in Singapore in the year 2000. It was one of the first conferences Black Hat ever did outside of the United States was here in Singapore. And we were the first purely technical, non-commercial security conference. And it's been fascinating to watch the landscape in Southeast Asia change and to watch the IT security landscape in Singapore change. I think this will be almost by 20% our largest show ever in Singapore. And so each year, things just continue to grow. And that's why we've added a 4th track of speaking, an additional track of speaking. We've grown the business hall. We had an open reception last night. And we're really working hard to try to help grow the community here in Singapore, because part of the Black Hat sort of ethos is that we try to get information into the hands of the practitioners and the decision makers so we can make informed decisions. You know, you might not make the right decision, but at least if you have some of the right information, it's not as bad as a completely misinformed, delusional decision. So I've got a couple of housekeeping things I always say before each Black Hat starts, and I have a couple of remarks, and we'll go on and introduce our keynote. I'm really proud that we have given away 31 scholarships for students, which means that students here in Singapore in university working in IT or security wrote white papers on a subject, submitted them to Black Hat. We went through them all and we selected 31 for receiving a free pass to Black Hat to try to get a younger generation involved. So if anybody's in the room who's got that scholarship, one of the 31, please raise your hand. Right on, thank you. Yeah. So try to get as much out of this as you can. Ask a million questions. At Black Hat, we love questions. Don't have to be afraid to raise your hand or challenge a speaker. They're not up here to just speak at you. It's meant to be much more interactive. And we also have 61 people from 61 different countries here at Black Hat, which is also, I think, a record. And we track which countries people are coming from. And there's 21 countries that have sent only a single person. And so I'm just going to name some of the countries to give you an idea of the scope of which people will travel for this knowledge. Algeria, America Samoa, Bahrain, Cambodia, Cameroon, Canada, Cyprus, Denmark, Iceland, Iran, Luxembourg, Malta, Papua New Guinea, Qatar, Romania, Sudan, Tanzania, and Tunisia. So we have a really wide perspective attendees here, perspectives of attendees here. And so that's why I want to encourage you to talk and take advantage of the breaks, because I think Black Hat is half content, but it's half social, right? Because a lot of the problems are social and political problems, not just technical problems. And so to solve those, you're going to have to actually interface with humans. I also have a couple of housekeeping things I want to bring up. This is just so you don't get lost and miss out on anything. And it's generally, sessions will start today at 10:15 on schedule. Right across the hallway here is what we call the business hall. That's generally where all the coffee breaks will be, and also where the reception tonight will be held. It's open now, so you can go in there anytime, meet with vendors, sit down, talk in maybe a more quiet environment. Lunch will be there at 12:45 this afternoon. And there's a reception that starts there at 5:30 this evening, right after the sessions end. And then tomorrow we have our second keynote from Samil Shah called The 7 Axioms of Security. Same room here, same time. But you won't have to listen to me say this all over again tomorrow. It'll be much shorter. Okay, I'd like to introduce now Doug Brown, the Managing Director for the Asia Pacific region for Qualys. And Qualys, for many of you who don't know, Qualys has been a long-term supporter of Black Hat, almost 15 years. And they were cloud before there was cloud. I think it was software as a service before it was software as a service. And so they've been around a long time and have seen the landscape change. Doug's been with Qualys since 2013, based in Sydney, Australia. He has extensive development experience and involvement in building security operations in different regions around the world. He's filled leadership, technical, consulting, sales roles. So he has a really solid understanding of the challenges and opportunities that companies face. He's going to give us a couple of words on where Qualys sees the market moving, and then I'll be back up to introduce our keynote. So, thank you very much. Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks. Morning, everyone. Thank you, and welcome to Black Hat Asia 2017. I wanted to take a few moments just to share with you one of the quotes that I kind of live by in the space that we have today. And that is a quote from Sun Tzu in The Art of War, which says, "Know thy enemy, know thyself," right? And I think it's very important to understand the different threats and risks we face in terms of knowing our enemy, right? Whether it be data loss breaches, whether it be malware, ransomware, exploits, vulnerabilities, which we're particularly good at, but all of those different spaces that we see out there, the different research that's coming out all of the time, the exploit feeds that come through from that, those are all the different threats and risks we need to understand the different threat actors and that at play out in the world. But to add to that, and to add to what Jeff was saying there as well about the complexities that we do see, is that the world is rapidly changing. We see digital transformation across the globe, businesses driving their critical sort of information, applications, and processes up onto the web, into the cloud, through the Internet of Things. And then they want all of this to be accessible from anywhere, anytime, from any device, whether it be a smartphone, a laptop, anything like that. They want to make sure that you can access that information to do your job and or use their service on a consumption basis. So that has actually changed the know yourself sort of paradigm quite a lot. You've got infrastructure sitting everywhere. You've got applications that are exposed everywhere. And you need to make sure that you understand those so that you can apply that threat risk lens and actually see where you have things that are exposed. So I think Black Hat Asia 2017 poses an extremely unique opportunity for you to actually go out there and talk to your fellow delegates, talk to the vendors and sponsors out there in the business hall who may have seen these different challenges and issues that you have in different other clients. They're a bit like bumblebees from flower to flower gathering pollen. They're seeing all those numerous clients. They're quite a good bunch of people to tie together the information security community because they're seeing all those different clients across the different regions. So go and talk to them, make use of their knowledge. The speakers that we have here today, go and grab some of their time, grab a coffee with them, talk to them about what you're doing. And I think Black Hat poses a unique opportunity to be able to go and do that. It's a very collaborative event, it always has been. It's different to others, so I think it's important to go and make use of that. So all I'll say further to what I've said now is make sure you get value out of this event. Thank you for being here and making the time to be here. Make sure it counts. And please come and talk to us through in the business hall area and enjoy Black Hat Asia 2017. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
I think for many of us, we're at a point in time where things have been relatively predictable for maybe 10 or 15 years, and now we're at a convergence. We see, or at least I see, a couple forces starting to change, starting to reach a tipping point. It's unclear exactly how things will go, but they're going to go in a direction, and that means we now become more valuable. We can influence the direction of some policy or technical standards, and so therefore, everything you've been working on, I think we're reaching an opportunity moment where we can be especially valuable. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples where I think this is happening. One is sort of the convergence between tech, the mentality of just ship it, produce code, race to market. It's almost a race to the bottom of who can ever get code out, the most features out. And it's been economically rewarding for a long period of time. but it's now starting to bump up against the awareness of policymakers. Policymakers are now starting to become concerned about the social impacts of some of these decisions. And there's a couple of drivers of why this is happening. Part is awareness of the populace, awareness of the decision makers. In the United States, the supposed meddling of Russia in the American election system, that rose the visibility of our profession quite a bit. Right? We're all being quoted in the newspapers. You can't get around some of these tidal forces. So I think what's going to happen now is we're going to be looked toward providing some of this policy advice, or we're going to be involved in some of these decisions. So if that happens, you need to be informed, and you need to think through the balances between tech imperatives, which is essentially a profit motive, and the social imperative. And these would be things like norms of behavior. What does it mean to be a quote-unquote good citizen on the internet? What are the concepts around the behavior of governments, say, in spying versus the behavior of governments in offense? And what we find is that the distinction between the behaviors you would do to, say, do recon and the behaviors you would take to perform offense, they're collapsing, they're getting really small. So preparing the battlefield looks a lot like normal intelligence gathering. And this is causing a lot of problems for policymakers because traditional behaviors, you could look at it and say, okay, that's just a government poking around, or they're just doing recon. You can't make those distinctions anymore. So how will society change? How will policy adapt? Another big driver of this is liability of the consumer versus liability of the manufacturer. And we're going to see the forcing function here is going to be the Internet of Things. So traditionally, manufacturers create software, they have a shrink wrap license, they ship the product off. Liability is essentially avoided or limited to the cost of the software. But what happens when the software has a huge social impact? So for example, in the past, my Windows crashes on an update, I lose some data, I can't really go after Microsoft, right? I'm bearing the liability, or I'm bearing the cost of the bad software. But in the future, with Internet of Things and connected devices, well, if my PlayStation burns down the house, is that really my problem? Right? Did I accept that with a software liability license waiver? No, I probably didn't. That's probably a manufacturer's liability. And so that means we're going to start to see liability shifting from consumers to manufacturers. And when that happens, I can guarantee manufacturers aren't going to like it. And they're going to start pushing back on policy. And so when you look, also I want to ask, when you look at how often you change tech, there's a couple drivers that force us update cycles. One is, right, we want the new shiny phone. How many people here have gotten a new phone in the last 2 years? Just raise your hand. Okay. How many people in the last 2 years have changed your smoke detector? Right, a couple. The long tail of Internet of Things devices are what's going to be our biggest problem. Right? A smoke detector lasts about 10 years and then it loses its functionality. So no updates for 10 years. Does anybody know of any device that's been resilient to attack for 10 years with no updates? Right? It's not going to happen. And the cost for replacing your smoke detectors, or for a company to replace the sensors in the ceiling, is generally more expensive than a lot of the prices of the devices themselves. So it'll be more expensive to find and replace the item than to buy it. So they don't have much of an incentive to do replacement. So you can see the forces between traditional ways of designing and developing software and the Internet of Things way. And it's going to change society. We're going to be involved in that because we're going to be designing the software, we're going to be testing the hardware, we're going to be advising the policymakers or the lawyers in the company, or when you're buying it through a purchase agreement, we're going to be the experts. And there's this long tail, I'm not joking. When I was at ICANN, we tried to measure the length of time it took for people to update name servers. Because very rarely a root name server's IP address will change. But when it does, we can measure it. We can see how long does it take, how many times are we getting queries for the old IP address until a majority of them switch over to the new IP address. And we found that the long tail for name servers was about 14 years. what would be an incentive to change that? And I just want to say IPv6. We're at a point where a lot of systems are being switched over to IPv6. Maybe this is one of our last chances to get an upgrade in with new equipment, new hardware that's V6 capable. But once we sort of boil down V6, we're going to be in a steady state. And that's going to be our infrastructure for a long, long time. And finally, I want to just talk briefly about distributed versus centralized infrastructure. And this is something where I don't know where it's going, but I can see sort of the contours. Think of the early days of 1 million websites and vlogs and blogs and bulletin boards. And then think today. It's giant social media conglomerates, search. We're moving to a centralized model. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. We get efficiency, predictability, cost. It's free a lot of times because the costs are hidden to us. We're being monetized, but it's not really apparent. And this trend, the centralization trend, besides every time Amazon East goes down and half the internet fails, what we're doing is we're making the internet more fragile. We're making a trade-off. And it's sort of a subconscious trade-off, but we're trading the benefits of distribution and decentralization for the benefits of centralization. And what do you think governments see? Now they see a belly button. They see a single point. I can go to Facebook and I can tell Facebook to take down all posts related to the thing I don't like. Well, that's easy. You go to Facebook. You don't have to go to 100,000 blogs. It's, in a legal term of, it would be considered an attractive nuisance. It's a single point now that governments can pressure and influence. These are now single points that other companies can sue and pressure. So what does that do to our internet? I know the benefits we're getting, but the long-term impacts and the fragility we're introducing with this centralization is not fully understood. So I want you to think about that. Imagine 10 years down the road, what does that do to our infrastructure? And my main point is just, I think when we make these trade-offs, the fragility versus efficiency, we should just do it with our eyes open. We should have policy, we should have tech involved, and that's going to be a lot of us in the room. And I think this, hopefully, Halvar has been thinking a lot on the issues of why we've built an internet that is not defensible. What are the trade-offs that we've been making along the road, and how, if at all, can we make mid-course corrections? So with that, it's going to be my pleasure, it really is my pleasure, to introduce Halvar. I first met Halvar at a Black Hat Amsterdam in 2001. And I was really immediately impressed by his depth of knowledge in his area, his curiosity, his intellect, and his ability to change his mind when confronted with new facts or new arguments. And I know that seems maybe silly, but there's a lot of people I know in the industry that they have their opinions, and it's really impossible to change their mind. But Halvar, you would get in a debate, whether it's technical or philosophical, and you could see him adjusting his worldview. And to me, that's really refreshing, because now you're not debating at someone, you're having a conversation, and you're evolving. And I think that's why he's been so successful in his career. He trained for Black Hat around the world on reverse engineering. And you have to remember, in those days, 2001, Halvar was the only person in the world training on reverse engineering. There's one lady that did some decompiler work in Australia, and there were some intelligence agencies, and that was it. Right? Now think about how you use reverse engineering in your job. Right? It's an incredibly huge industry, but a lot of it came from the thoughts and tools and techniques from Halvar and his friends. So he's truly an innovator and a pioneer in the reverse engineering space. He built a company, he sold a company based on these ideas to Google. And then I think he started his second career, whether he admits it or not, as a manager of technical talent. And he quickly began accumulating lessons learned in the world of enterprise scale security. And so I'm really looking forward to what Halvar's been thinking about and writing about in his keynote today. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Halvar Flach.